Welcome to The Forgotten, Episode 9, An mein Volk. I want to begin this episode with the announcement that this podcast has been rescheduled to Saturday evening due to private issues. It is a lot easier for me to upload this during the weekend and not after my 600-kilometer weekend commute. I hope this is not too disturbing to you. If I should face most avid resistance against this measure, I will think about changing it back. When we left Gneisenau and Napoleonic Europe last time, the Emperor of the French had just crossed the Niemen into Russia, starting the campaign which will ultimately lead to his first downfall. This campaign, however, is way too large and expensive to include it into my podcast. I will, however, refer to many of the events and people involved. But I nonetheless want to start by answering an unanswered question by my dear listener Northfield. I do owe him a lot for helping me set up the technical details of this podcast, and I do believe that he deserved this question to be answered on the show itself. Furthermore, it grants me the opportunity to open a new field I have not said too much about earlier: the opponents of the reforms. After already having characterized the Count von der Marwitz before, I want to take a closer look at one of the biggest and most venomous snakes in the snake pit at Berlin. Jean-Pierre Federick, chief tutor of the Crown Prince Frederick William, later Frederick William IV. Although his name might suggest it, Ancillon did not stem from France but hailed from Berlin. He became the tutor of the Crown Prince in 1810, probably due to the Queen of Prussia not liking his predecessor Friedrich Delbrück. One of his descendants, Hans Delbrück, is one of my prime sources for this series, and you can imagine that his opponent on Ancillon was quite biased. Without a doubt, Ancillon was a staunch reactionary and personal and political opponent to both von Stein and his successor Hardenberg, and by having a close connection to the royal family, he used every opportunity to sabotage their standing with the monarch. He opposed everything Hardenberg stood for, especially the October Edict and the idea of a Prussian constitution. Before becoming chief tutor, however, he had been a professor of philosophy and a member of the Königlich Preußische Akademie der Wissenschaften, Royal Prussian Academy of Sciences, in Berlin. His reactionary ideas and beliefs, however, mostly stemmed from observing the French Revolution and the terrors and political instabilities it brought, as his prime wish for the welfare of the state was, I quote, harmony between the interior and foreign politics. After the wars, he used all his powers to restore the old order in Prussia and became a close ally of the Austrian Chancellor von Metternich when becoming foreign minister in 1832. As you can see, not all Prussian intellectuals were so fond of progress. While probably everyone agreed that reforms were necessary, many of them had an eclectic view on them, meaning that they wanted to reform the given structures and re-intertwine them, not creating new systems and, God forbid, something only closely resembling giving power to the people. Not eliminating this political resistance properly, either by political or even harsher means, was probably one of the major blunders the reformers had committed, and it will lead to much grief for especially Gneisenau later, as his reformer position would cost him his social standing in the years of the Metternich restoration. Leaving Clausewitz with the Russians at the start of the war, Gneisenau went for Sweden again. I strongly advise everyone interested in this and able to read German getting Clausewitz's commentary on the Russian campaign, both for many historical details others forget and for an introspective to Clausewitz himself, as he greatly embellishes his own role in the campaign. This book is hard to get your hands on. I found it by chance in an old antiquarian bookshop, but it is definitely worth a read. For a broader but excellent and well-readable introspective into the campaign, I recommend Adam Zamoyski's 1812. Gneisenau, however, meets with a Swedish crown prince, former French Marshal Jean-Baptiste Bernadotte, who had filled the vacant position of heir apparent in Sweden in 1810 and quickly became the de facto ruler. He had never really liked Napoleon anyways, considered him a rival, and when ascending to his very elevated position, he quickly joined France's enemies in secrecy. In this rather conspiratory meeting with Gneisenau, he promised him to land 30,000 men in northern Germany should the opportunity arise. With this rather satisfying promise in his pocket, Gneisenau departs from Stockholm to Britain again, and together with his friend Count von Münster meets the Prince Regent George, who had taken over from the still King George III, who was, by all means, mad, and pretty much just asked for money and help in creating a Hanover-based uprising against France. There was a major problem to this anyways. Lord Castleray, the former Secretary of War in the colonies, who had kicked Lord Canning's rear in the duel before, if you remember this story, was the new Foreign Secretary, and he probably considered a friend of his foe Canning a foe as well. So he did his best to undermine the proposals of Gneisenau and finally convinced the British government to wait for news from the Russian theatre first. However, the regent had none of it, and he promised to dispatch a fleet to restart actions against the French, as well as funding the uprising and even the Prussian reform movement. This was more than Gneisenau could have possibly hoped for, and he stayed in Britain for the major part of the Russian campaign, furthermore influencing the British government and coordinating the Prussian efforts to raise a new army. He even manages to win Lord Castleray over, and pretty efficiently cooperates with him in organizing the British efforts against Napoleon. On the 26th of February 1813, way after the end of the campaign in Russia, he lands in Kolberg again. What had happened in the times between? I have to manage the so-called Tauroggen Convention here. On the 30th of December, the commander of the aforementioned Prussian Auxiliary Corps the Prussians were forced to send to the French aid, but which did not see any action during the campaign, Ludwig Count Georg von Wartenburg had secretly allied with the Russian spearheads hot on Napoleon's heels in Tauroggen in Lithuania, promising the Russians not to attack them. The king had at first wanted Georg's head for it, but as soon as he found out how terrible Napoleon's defeat really was, he quickly switched sides. In January, he had created a commission for the armament of the nation, as well as allowing voluntary military service in February. Furthermore, all exceptions from military duties were now declared null and void, and the Prussian army quickly doubled in size. Prussia was on the road to war again. Landing in Kolberg, Gneisenau had brought weapons and uniforms for 20,000 men with him, even artillery and ammunition. This was a gift from the British. On the 23rd and 24th of February, in Kalisz, in the Duchy of Warsaw, where the Russians had posted their headquarters, a formal alliance between Prussia and Russia was ratified in the Treaty of Kardash. This treaty included two secret agreements, granting the Prussians the reinstation of the borders of 1806 with even some additions in northern Germany. Furthermore, the alliance with the French was officially cancelled. Now, war with France was hardly avoidable. Gneisenau immediately departed for Breslau. On the 14th of March, two main armies are formed, one under Blücher and one under York, the former having Scharnhorst as his chief of staff. Breslau was in a state of patriotic exhilaration. Many Prussian young nobles enlisted into the Prussian Light Infantry and Freikorps, and there were mass demonstrations all around the country. The Prussians wanted their honor back, and they wanted Napoleon's troops to leave the sacred German soil once and for all. The 17th of March is one of the major turning points in the history of Germany. Frederick William III, who was by no means a man of the people and had kept his distance to his subjects, published the legendary appeal An mein Volk, to my people, which he had not written himself, but who would ever know that? I will use a translation from German History in Documents and Images at ghdi.ghi-dc.org, since I want to remain true to the source and do not want to blur the meaning due to my lack of translating qualities. I will read the whole thing, so if you are not interested, you may skip this part. To my people. There is no need of explaining to my loyal subjects or to any German the reasons for the war which is about to begin. They lie plainly before the eyes of awakened Europe. We succumbed to the superior force of France. The peace which followed deprived me of my people, and, far from bringing us blessings, it inflicted upon us deeper wounds than the war itself, sucking out the very marrow of the country. Our principal fortresses remained in the hand of the enemy, and agriculture, as well as the highly developed industries of our towns, was crippled. The freedom of trade was hampered, and thereby the sources of commerce and prosperity cut off. The country was left a prey to the ravages of destitution. I hoped, by the punctilious fulfillment of the engagements I had entered into, to lighten the burdens of my people, and even to convince the French emperor that it would be to his own advantage to leave Prussia her independence. But the purest and best of intentions on my part were of no avail against insolence and faithlessness, and it became only too plain that the emperor's treaties would gradually ruin us even more surely than his wars. The moment is come. We can no longer harbor the slightest illusion as to our situation. Brandenburgers, Prussians, Silesians, Pomeranians, Lithuanians, you know what you have borne for the past 7 years. You know the sad fate that awaits you if we do not bring this war to an honorable end. Think of the times gone by, of the great elector, he means Frederick I. The great Frederick, remember the blessings for which your forefathers fought under their leadership, and which they paid for with their blood. Freedom of conscience, national honor, independence, commerce, industry, learning. Look at the great example of our powerful allies, the Russians. Look at the Spaniards, the Portuguese. For such objects as these even weaker peoples have gone forth against mightier enemies and returned in triumph. Witness the heroic Swiss and the people of the Netherlands. Great sacrifices will be demanded from every class of the people, for our undertaking is a great one, and the number and resources of our enemies far from insignificant. But would you not rather make these sacrifices for the fatherland and for your own rightful king than for a foreign ruler who, as he has shown by many examples, will use you and your sons and your uttermost farthing for ends which are nothing to you? Faith in God, perseverance, and the powerful aid of our allies will bring us victory as the reward of our honest efforts. Whatever sacrifices may be required of us as individuals, they will be outweighed by the sacred rights for which we make them, and for which we must fight to a victorious end unless we are willing to cease to be Prussians or Germans. This is the final, the decisive struggle. Upon it depends our independence, our prosperity, our existence. There are no other alternatives but an honorable peace or a heroic end. You would willingly face even the latter for honor's sake, for without honor no Prussian or German could live. However, we may confidently await the outcome. God and our own firm purpose will bring victory to our cause, and with it an assured and glorious peace, and the return of happier times. Frederick William, Breslau, March 17th, 1813. In this new army, the king wanted Gneisenau back as a soldier. So on the 11th of March already, he had been made a major general. Furthermore, he was posted right at Scharnhorst's side, as a quartermaster general of the Elbarmee under Blücher. I do think that to be quite the favourable end to this episode, which is cut short because I will be on vacation starting tomorrow. I will enjoy a lengthy stay in Berlin until Monday next week, which will result in next week not having an episode. So, join me in 2 weeks for the event you hopefully have been waiting for, the Befreiungskriege. I can promise you that this episode will be a very, very lengthy one. I hope every one of you who goes on a trip to somewhere has a safe one, and I want to thank each and every listener for following me on my trip through Napoleonic Europe. I wish you a good day or a good night. See you next time.